Welcome to Greek Accents Lesson 5, Enclitics and ἐστίν. In this lesson we'll cover how enclitics operate with other words, how enclitics accent with other enclitics, and especially how to accent the word ἐστίν. An enclitic is a word that leans on the previous word for its accent. In Greek we use the term enclitikon, something that inclines or leans on the previous word. Enclitics are typically 1 or 2 syllables long. In this lesson, I'll primarily be displaying and illustrating example patterns of how enclitics operate. So firstly, 1-syllable enclitic combinations. We begin with anthropostis. Anthropos normally accents with an acute upon the antepenult, the third last syllable. With a 1-syllable enclitic, it gets an extra accent upon the ultima, the last syllable of anthropos. So in combination, anthropostis. What happens next if you get an ultima on the penult, the second last syllable? In that case, you also add an acute accent to the ultima, polostis. What happens if the penult is an acute? In that case, a single syllable enclitic will change nothing about the accent, logostis. If you have an acute accent upon the ultima, you also do nothing, theostis, theostis. Lastly, theouti, theute. What happens if you have a circumflex upon the ultima, followed by a 1-syllable enclitic? Nothing. So in only 2 situations where you have a single syllable enclitic, do you change anything? In both cases, you add an acute accent to the final syllable of the word. That's those first 2 cases, anthropostis and polostis. What happens then if you have a 2-syllable enclitic word? Then we get some more variation. Here we're going to use the plural of tis, tines, and the same thing happens if you are accenting upon the antepenult. So 3 syllables back on anthropou. The last syllable of this word, u, counts as short for accentuation purposes, and so it gains here a acute accent, anthropoutines. Similarly with polos, a colt or a foal, polou, the accent remains a circumflex upon the omega because u counts as short for accentuation purposes, and then the enclitic leans upon the word and gives it another acute upon the ultima. So same principle between anthropostis and anthropoutines and polostis and poloutines. It is in the other combinations that we find a little bit of variation. So logos accents on the penult with an acute accent. Here we will gain another acute accent on the ultima of tines, and it in turn will turn to a grave if followed by other accented words. If that second syllable of the enclitic is long, as in this example, anthropon tinon, of some people, genitive here, genitive plural, so anthropon accents upon the middle omega, and then tinon accents on the second syllable, also an omega, it accents as a circumflex. Theos, accenting with a final acute, remains final acute, does not become a grave, does not change accent, does not change accent upon the tines. Similarly, a final circumflex remains unchanged, theoutines, some people, some things of God, remains unchanged. So when there is a 2-syllable enclitic, yes, it does alter things somewhat. What about ἐστίν? Ἐστίν is a frequent enough word that it arrives in various combinations. Basically, it follows the combinations we saw in the previous slide, but it's worth learning and knowing ἐστίν by itself. So with an antepenult acute, anthropos ἐστίν, with a circumflex upon the penult, polos ἐστίν, with a acute upon the penult, logos ἐστίν, with an acute upon the ultima, theos ἐστίν, with a circumflex upon the ultima, theou ἐστίν, and in combination with actually a proclitic, something that leans forward, this combination ουκ ἐστίν is common enough. Ουκ ἐστίν, the accent goes onto the first syllable of ἐστίν. In isolation, unlike my heading here, but if you were normally writing ἐστίν by itself, you would accent it in a lexicon, for example, on the iota, though there are some cases where you'll see ἐστίν with the accent upon the epsilon, as we'll see in a few minutes. What happens when enclitics follow each other if one enclitic is leaning upon another enclitic? In that case, you typically work backwards and you accent with acutes. So here we have a phrase, I που της σου πεσίν. If somewhere someone said to you. Πεσίν is also an enclitic, I should point out. So all these words are enclitic, essentially. So we start at the end. Πεσίν will add its acute accent to su. Su then adds an acute accent to tis. Tis then adds an acute accent to pu. Notice not a circumflex. Pu with a circumflex would be the interrogative question where. Pu without a circumflex is going to be the indefinite somewhere, or the particle. I also takes an acute here. I που της σου πεσίν. If someone said to you somewhere, somehow. It's a very indefinite kind of statement. There are a few other cases of instances where enclitics accent in slightly unusual ways. Firstly, at the start of a clause, an enclitic will often accent. Πεσίν ho anthropos. Here, πεσίν is an enclitic. It starts the clause. It will typically accent upon the second syllable. Πεσίν ho anthropos. Ἐστίν will often accent upon the first syllable especially when it is indicating what people call an existential use, that something exists. Here, there is mu to me, πολλά χρήματα. There is much wealth to me. Ἐστίν will accent like this at the start of a clause. And also, to be honest, if ἐστίν is being used in a particularly existential sense, it may accent ἐστίν elsewhere in a clause, despite the other rules. We also see that enclitics accent after elision, typically on the second syllable. So, πολλά ἐστίν, if we elide the alpha out of πολλά ἐστίν, what happens? We get πολεστίν. The accent on πολλά actually moves forward, and the second syllable of the enclitic takes an acute accent. There is a rule for elision or accents after elision, that elision places the accent upon the preceding syllable in that word, unless it is a conjunction or a preposition. We also see enclitics become accented when they are stressed. Ar ἐστίν ho theos eu. Does God exist or not? Here, ἐστίν is accented because it is that kind of existential use and it's being stressed as the question. It accents here upon the epsilon. Eu, when it's used in final position, as in here a question, does God exist or not, is also accented with an acute. Here it is ending the sentence.